Curselock LitRPG Curse Magic Adventure. By Left Right. Chapter 34, Smuggler's Guild. Through the seawater rusted door, the group came eye to eye with the mountain of a man who opened it for them. The man was dirty with grease and sweat, long dark streaks crossed his stubble where his working hands scratched himself. His fingernails told the story of years of manual labor, constant abuse to unload or load the city's many ships. The man didn't look twice at the group, nor did he care that three young men, kids really, had entered. In fact, the man didn't seem to care about anything other than the small pipe he clutched dearly. Faded burnt blue residue sat dormant in the pipe as the man hastily tried to light a match. Eventually he did, and the sweet taste of his pleasure found his lungs. As the man blew out blue smoke, Leland recognized the drug. Once they were past the guard and into the connected tunnel, he spoke up. "Mana dust. I've never seen it before." Boar didn't look back, too busy navigating through the slimy undercity, but he did speak up. "Street name for it is Lucky Blue, although you sure aren't lucky when it digs its talons into you." "Why do they call it that then?" Jude asked. "Because you are lucky enough to be smoking mana dust." "That doesn't make sense." "Doesn't have to." They stopped at an intersection, one path leading off further into the darkness, the other towards what sounded like the ocean. "Just what is this place?" Glennie asked when they began towards the dark. "Shoutwell used to be owned by pirates. This is the main stronghold," Boar answered, feeling around the walls as they walked. "Does this connect to the sewers?" Leland asked. "In a few spots, but most have been sealed up for when city inspectors make sure the concrete isn't cracking. So, the odds are low that the Sightless will be down here." "I'd say so, but who knows? If they want to remain hidden, they could most definitely keep their anonymity here." Jude subconsciously scrunched his hand, like gripping his axe. "And where exactly is here?" Boar didn't answer right away, his focus on a small rope covered in sludge and damp sea moss. He cautiously pulled the line, like any force above the bare minimum would snap it. When he did, a small cutout in the wall twisted before pulling in on itself. The butler then smiled. "Boys, are you ready for an experience you'll never forget?" He received various unenthusiastic head nods. "Well," Boar said, sticking his hand into the cutout and pulling. "I welcome you to the real Smugglers Guild." As the wall slowly creaked open, like a door, Leland asked, "Really? The city guard knows about this tunnel, they, however, do not know about what is through this door. When the Inquisitors were here 3 years ago, they had a hard time finding the Icewillow's product storage. All information pointed to it being in the Smugglers Guild, but they never figured out there was a second." "That's ingenious." Jude laughed. "Yeah, real smart," Glennie said, a glare catching their guide. "Why didn't you tell them? You were working with the Onryos by then, right? Why not help the Inquisitors?" Boar stepped through the door and signaled for the boys to follow. "That is simple. If I had told the Inquisitors, then the news of my betrayal would have leaked. I would have been dead before I could leave the city. The Onryos too. Anyone I loved would have had their throats slit." "The Onryos know of this place and allow it?" Leland asked. "They do and no, they do not. This is a lawless place. They have no power here. If anything, this place has power over them. Just look at the eldest son. Lost his life coming down here to get his fix." They turned a short corner and suddenly the floor dropped. Down it went, like the cliff face of the plateau they met Alkin on. It sprawled wide and long, a singular cavern with dozens of tunnels leading in and out. "It's a whole city!" Jude exclaimed. Hundreds of small wooden buildings made up the underbelly city, each molded or slick with moss. A foundation of darkness and salt water filled the depths while scaffolding held structures high into the cavern's airspace. Ancient stone bridges connected points together, each housing dozens of other buildings built from their sound support. People moved without worry or reprieve, often shoving their way through the crowded pathways. Some moved with entourage and guard, but everyone at least carried a dagger. Fights were a common sight for the group's sky-like vantage, as well as the murderous shoves that ended said battles with a corpse flailing towards the certain doom below the city life. "This is amazing," Leland whispered. "How does the whole city not know about this place?" Glennie asked. Vibrant lights took place around the area, each a different intensity and color. Some were attached to buildings, others drilled deep into the foundation. There were even a few drifting balloons, each sporting their own light source. "Most don't want to know. Their lives are good enough above," why would they need to search for anything else? Bor asked rhetorically. The butler led them down a slick staircase and the occasional ladder, eventually putting them at the edge of the filthy, rickety buildings. There were only a few souls around them, each holding glowing blue pipes or puffing similar-colored smoke. Come on, we haven't even gotten to the good part. Or scary, depending on who you ask, Bor said with a glint in his eye. They pushed on, crossing weathered stone bridges with decades of attempted reinforcement. Steel beams had been added to each, crossing the length of the walkway and partially into the stonework. The process had amalgamated the straight walk, giving the bridge many hazardous tipping obstacles. Once across one of the larger bridges, the group came upon what Leland could only describe as the market. Thousands of people pushed their way through a single street, either side filled with peddlers or shopkeepers. Items of all kinds were eye candy for any opportunistic thief lord, only the threat of the smuggler enforcers stopped their greedy hands. 5 minutes of looking, Bor said, then we find Poppy. The boys nodded earnestly, going from one blanket with knickknacks shrewdly laid on top to a crooked table housing jewelry boxes full of odd eggs. A sign read monster eggs, and suddenly Leland found himself skipping to the next cellar. Jude inspected a small buckler shield, one which rhythmically glowed with off-white sparkle. He started haggling, asking for a demonstration before ultimately putting the item back despite the discount he was offered. Glennie crouched before a small table manned by a wrinkled old woman. She waved her hand over 3 cups, moving them with frighteningly fast speed. When Glennie couldn't pick the correct cup, Bor stepped in and told the woman off. Keep your wits about you, Bor then said. Everyone here is looking to score. You are too green not to take advantage of. Glennie nodded with understanding, venturing to the next booth that caught his fancy. In the end, he bartered his 2 steel daggers and some gold for a pair with a bit longer reach. It was then he remembered the parasitic cloak he left in the mansion. He wondered just how much money they could get if they sold it. Then he realized it didn't really matter. Nothing he had seen so far had even come close to the level of uniqueness the cloak held. It was then and there that he decided he would keep it, just like Leland and Jude wanted. Eventually the group congregated on Leland, who was actively arguing with a heavily warded shopkeeper. When Bor loomed over the conversation, the man quickly apologized, packed his things, and left. Coward, the butler spit. Let's get moving. They left the market street, heading towards another wide bridge. As they did so, Leland and the others grew confused. They had pushed through a mass of people, but now the crowd had mostly dissipated. They are watching you, Bor, Glennie then said, his eyes having turned into lizard-like slits. I know, I didn't think they'd recognize me this quickly. Jude recoiled at that. Because you are House Onryo's butler. Bor chuckled at that. No, because I used to run things here. Old wounds, you know. The man's demeanor then completely changed. From quiet proper manners to a sinister smirk thirsting for battle, Bor kept his chin high and drew his weapon. It flared to life from his hand tattoo, a long rapier made of polished silver steel. He then held it to his cheek, the sharp edge grazing his short stubble while the tip threatened an alleyway. Come on out, I've already smelled you, Bor said, causing the shadows to morph into people. From out of the darkness, 9 battle-ready thugs stepped. Each held various weapons or their legacies while also carrying the same branding tattoo. It marked across their faces regardless of scars or acne, in the form of a large black W. Witches, Jude seethed. One of the thugs bellowed, is that Bor leading more children into the belly of the beast? I guess one death on your hands isn't enough to call the wrath of the lords. It was for me, but then again, I slit his throat while you fed yours Lucky Blue. Bor didn't respond. The man snapped and pointed. I remember now. Not much of a talker, you. Always the silent type hiding in the shadows looking to take out the competition. Not anymore, I guess. Traitor, you are. Well, guess what? The Icewallows aren't around to protect you anymore, and you know what that may. The man's sentence was abruptly cut off as Bor flickered across the street rubble. The thug then fell, lifeless and bleeding from a singular puncture wound in the middle of his forehead. I remember you as well, Bor spat. Too much of a talker, you were. The butler then readied his weapon again, turning to the other witches. Chapter 35, Ambush. As the blade of Bor's rapier clashed against a short sword pulsating isolated gales of wind, the boys readied themselves. Glennie was first to move, slipping invisible and rushing forward. He ignored the sparks of wind, his daggers quickly finding flesh against an unsuspecting woman holding a crossbow. Blood gushed high into the air, taking to the swordsman's tempest and littering the battlefield with crimson rain. Glennie didn't let up his assault, twisting his daggers deeper into the woman's nape while wrapping his legs around her torso. The woman stumbled, firing off a bolt that exploded against a stone pillar. Dust and debris fell, obscuring the alleyway. Abruptly, a semi-invisible body was thrown out of the cloud before slamming into a wall well behind Leland. Jude twitched with rage, pulling his oversized battle axe from his hand tattoo and then launching it at a witch carrying an equal-size axe. He then jumped, landed before the crossbow holder and axe wielder. With a mighty war cry, a red crescent blazed from Jude's horizontal slash. The sudden attack stopped the axe wielder from dumping the contents of a small vial on the woman's wounds. Before the glass vial hit the ground, Jude was swinging. He pushed into the pair, keeping his focus on the injured woman. Leland slammed his palm into his grimoire, offering mana and life force in exchange for a violet halo. It formed above his head, wisps of ethereal smoke trailing with the direction of the wind. His tome then skipped back a few pages, finding the curse its master intended to cast. Power welled up around Leland's heart as he spoke the power word aloud, slow. For a moment the legacy of curses was connected to the witch wielding a battle axe eerily similar to Jude's own. Leland felt genuine thrill from the battle, along with distant worry for the crossbow-holding woman. The connection severed and Leland watched Jude capitalize on the slowed man. A hand was sliced clean off at the wrist, falling to the hard ground below with a wet thud. The man screamed and shoved the woman towards their attacker. Jude met her with an iron shoulder, bashing into her face as Leland spoke another power word. Fracture. The axe wielder stumbled, fear gripping his shaky legs and launching himself forward. He leaped, aiming for the guarding Jude. The man landed and quickly found himself in a barrage of haphazard attacks. Wild swings met wild swings as Jude slowly killed his humanity. Rage sprouted from its corpse, boosting his strength with the power of the berserker lord. The man took the initiative as well, allowing his fear to fuel his inextinguishable hatred. Rage carved into its mirror image as two of the same legacy battled for supremacy. Leland didn't care about honor or right of the duel as he spoke another power word. Maul, he said, summoning forth 8 ethereal crows. They swooped around the scaffolding and buildings, looping high into the cavern's enclosed airspace before dive-bombing into their target. Leland commanded them to attack the man's heels and knees, urging them to disable the man by shredding his tendons. Blood started to drip as the crows made their presence known. Glennie suddenly did the same, but to the woman he initially attacked. He finished the injured woman, killing her with 2 knives to the spine. A new witch peeled off the battle with Boar, waving his hand at Glennie's transparent form. The stone street rumbled with magic and mana, forcing the rogue to dive. Off-white crystals magnified in size, exploding with growth. The battlefield suddenly became a salt jungle as the legacy of salt sowed his seed. Glennie didn't wait around and ran through the obstacle course of sharpened salt crystals. Suddenly the crystals retracted, leaving the rogue out in the open. Hesitation caught his inexperienced foot as a blade of salt sprung from the ground. A gash formed against his ankle and thigh, running up his side. The salt mage began to wave his hands again, but a murder of crows broke his concentration. Leland cursed his bones for good measure as well, giving his friend enough time to close the distance. A crystallized wall broke from the stone floor, encircling the man while walling him off from his attackers. It didn't matter to the birds, however, their ethereal forms allowing ease of passage through the solid mineral. The mage screamed as his skin was plucked from his broken bones. Leland set his attention back on the berserker battling Jude. The difference in rank was making itself known as Jude was losing his footing. Each attack he dodged left him that much more winded, each attack he blocked strained his muscles that much more. Focusing on his newest contract, Leland put his concentration into a single curse. His grimoire left his hand, floating beside him like it was trapped within his orbit. He pushed the one emotion he knew berserker lords failed to fully comprehend, calmness. Fracture. Both Jude and the witch went sluggish, their legacy bonuses drifting further from their grasp. Pain invaded their blurred minds, Jude much less than his opponent. Multiple broken bones and torn tendons flooded the man's senses, pushing him closer to loss of consciousness. He teetered on his feet, the grip on his axe failing. A deep red line suddenly appeared along the back of his knees. A groan escaped his lips as he leaned over in pain, only for a dagger to find his jugular a moment later. Blood exploded from the wound as Glennie's legacy ability took hold. As the man fell, lifeless yet calm, Jude gasped in air. What was that? What just happened? Leland resummoned his crows, pointing them to the crystalline cylinder with a mage core. He then turned to his friend and said, "A contract. Figured you'd both shrug off fear or intimidation. Gee, good call. How's that cut, Glenn?" "Don't call me that, and it would be appreciated if I could borrow your ring, Leland." Leland handed over the ring of regeneration without argument. A crow then perched on a nearby sign, locking eyes with its master and cawing. "Oh, it looks like that salt mage is dead," Leland said. "Our kind really are weak." Pain receded from Glenny's sheared body, a feeling he nearly groveled at. "You can seriously affect the tide of battle. Thanks for the save earlier, by the way." "That's what I'm here for," Leland said, turning to Boar and his ongoing fight. "Do you think he needs help?" 5 witches fought against the butler, each holding various light cuts or deep puncture wounds. Boar himself hardly seemed to be sweating. "Nah," Jude said, his tattoo of regeneration releasing the strain on his body. "I don't think I can fight again without losing myself. Calming me with your contract might not be the way to go in the future. Of course use it if you deem it necessary, but I can still feel the rage swimming around in my head." "How do you mean?" Leland asked, watching Boar dance around a sword whirling with air and a fist crackling with lightning. "The calming solution is like a blanket. The rage is hidden underneath. I just need to figure out how to calm myself, because this feels like I could snap at any moment." The trio went silent as Boar's combat showing continued. The man moved with expert finesse and grace, despite his height. He used the battlefield to his advantage, kicking up rubble or skipping off uneven ground and forcing his attackers to match his keen footwork. The tip of a spear whistled through the air as it fired forward, only to be parried by the guard of Boar's rapier. Attacking the wide-open target, he whipped his flexible sword in an upward slash. It caught against the man's chest, slicing his shirt to ribbons while etching the same pattern deep into his bones. The sudden wound split fully as the man tried to control his decimated shoulder. Like peeling a banana, his muscles separated from their internal structure. The man crumbled, falling to the floor while using his remaining strength to push away in retreat. "Why can Boar harm them more than us?" Glenny asked. "The attacks I usually think will kill only harmed. Like that woman holding the crossbow. I thought I would have severed her spine with my opening attack." "Difference in rank," Leland answered simply. "A rank 3 fireball will engulf a rank 1. Goes the same for people who are higher rank." Jude frowned before yelling at the butler. "Boar. What rank are you?" "Seriously? He's not going to answer that. He's fighting for his 3. Boar yelled back. Jude gave Glenny a smug smile. "What rank are these guys?" "Peak 1, I'd say." "Hey, how about that?" Leland mused. The battle was pretty much over. Without the spear users, the offensive potential of the witches simply couldn't keep up with Boar's own. Leland hummed at this, a thought stirring in his mind. Slowly he came to terms with asking. Boar seemed to be reasonable enough. "Hey Boar. I've got a new spell I haven't tried. Mind if I cast it?" Boar's face twitched, but he relented fine. "All right, it's an area of effect and I don't know if it will harm you." Leland didn't wait for a response. After telling Jude and Glenny to step back, he flipped to the newest page in his grimoire. Knowledge and aptitude invaded his mind, guiding his hand in purging the wicked. A word came to him, one of potential and strife. Warlock. His eyes burst into a brilliant and vibrant purple flame as a similar fire sprouted around him in a small circle. The memory of meeting the Lord of Curses came to him, more specifically the souls of the damned clawing their way out of the lifeless soil of the petrified forest. Mana and life force mixed deep within Leland's own soul before filling in the circle of purple fire. He saw them, everyone within his circle, his domain. He found Jude and Glenny a few steps behind him. He ignored them. He moved the circle, finding more souls to identify. Boar was easy enough. Mentally marking Boar as safe, Leland unleashed the finalized spell within his soul. "Bow to me." Chapter 36, Circle of Souls. "Kneel before me." Creeping groans marked the start of the curse, the start of damnation. They came from underground, like tiny flower stems poking out of the soil. Jagged nails came first, each broken and ghostly, each fervently digging upward. Wrists and hands were next, followed closely by elongated forearms. They flailed, like a crowd swaying offbeat to live music. The groans deepened as the first few heads breached the stone floor. Violet eyes cast with diabolical flame locked onto the witches, one pair for each. Suddenly a pillar of purple flame burst from beneath each witch. The fire spun into a vortex, encircling around their marks before fading into something ethereal. A scream escaped the spearman Boar had moments ago sundered despite the flames failing to burn his skin. He stammered back, the gaze of one of the damned too much for his wounded life. He tried to run, tried to flee, but found himself at an impasse of towering purple flame. It looped around the whole small battlefield, sectioning the witches and Boar off from the rest of the underbelly. The spearman tried to pass through the boundary but found only pain. The moment he touched the circle, a thick green oozed from his hand. He screamed again. The other witches hesitated. They looked from their friend to the purple fire and finally to Boar. The butler stood stark still, watching the display of magic with a keen eye, at least, until a sword ignited with gales of wind entered his periphery. The two men shared a small bout, but the witch quickly retreated to his friends. It was then they noticed green mist leaking from their own bodies. The spearman crawled towards them, every broken patch of stone, every bit of rubble like chasms or mountains. His body was failing him, the green mist taking too much with it as it spilled out. His sliced open muscles died first, a clear image of his upper torso slowly detached from his broken body. As he died, his eyes met one of the souls sticking up from the ground. Ethereal eyes built from purple flame bore themselves into the fading life of the spearman, consuming his remaining life force. Abruptly the soul faded into the ground, its belly full and its master waiting. Leland wasn't surprised that the soul of the damned sprouted from the ground beside him. Nor was he surprised when his body moved without command. His legacy blared instruction directly into his mind, allowing him to accept the soul's gift. Holding out his hand, Leland slowly touched his summon. Green mist poured from the soul like a broken faucet. The mist swirled around Leland's hand before suddenly being inhaled by the young man. It entered his lungs before disappearing deep within his body. Pain receded from his broken arm while range of motion and flexibility returned. Leland rolled his shoulder, finding it in prime condition. It was then he felt a bubble of heat combine into his soul. His body shuddered with delight, like a good stretch after a long day. He felt powerful, like when he enacted his contract with the Lord of Magic. A presence stirred beside him, another soul of the damned. It offered its hand to Leland, who accepted it without ceremony. At their touch, more green mist spilled forth before quickly being inhaled again. Bruises and superficial cuts healed at that moment, all the while a hit of pain made itself known in his head. A headache, manageable but oddly alien. It thumped in an off-rhythmic way, like a person beating against a brick wall while slowly succumbing to exhaustion. Leland frowned, finding the purple flames across the market street still roaring. He snapped, "Fracture." He whistled, "Maul." His tattoo caught at him. A low crunch sounded, a knuckle burst open which was quickly followed by a yelp in surprise. Green mist surrounded the witch completely before an ethereal copy of the woman in question was stripped away. A soul of the damned capitalized, locking its fiery gaze on a rogue soul. A moment later the summon appeared outside the circle of souls, offering his hand to its master. Leland hesitated but felt obliged. He touched the skeletal being, taking its burden into himself. Heat found his soul a moment later, fueling him to continue despite the increasing pain in his mind. The thumping had increased for the worse, each pounding moment causing Leland to lapse in concentration. Leland turned his attention to the two remaining in his circle. One was being mauled by a flock of crows, the other watching on with horror. A warm wetness then dripped across his lips and chin. "Leland!" He heard someone yell. It was blood, he realized, trickling from his nose. When did he get hit in the nose? That's strange, he thought. A green figure suddenly pulled away from its now deceased host, returning the soul of the damned to its summoner. It reached a hand out, offering its penance. Leland hesitated. Someone was touching him, shaking him. The purple flames of his summon drew his attention, however. Green leaked from his outstretched hand, precious soul energy being lost forever. Leland gasped, his bloodshot eyes going wide. Suddenly Jude and Glennie were next to him, each yelling with fear and ferocity. The spell. Grogginess invaded his senses, everything went dull. Pain bashed against his head, each thud threatening his consciousness. But Leland understood. The circle of purple flame suspended, cutting itself off from this reality. Leland's domain collapsed, his ethereal vision failed him. Red was all he saw, that and the general outline of his best friends. He collapsed, 2 arms keeping him from breaking his face open on the rubble below. With enough presence of mind, Leland gave the 4 souls of the damned around him a final glance. The 3 whose gifts he had accepted disappeared first, fading from existence like a darkness against a light. The last, the one still holding a soul, hesitated, its flaming eyes meeting Leland's own. There wasn't anger or sorrow, but rather understanding and patience. The soul was for it to keep, at least until Leland could accept such a potent resource. It was then he wondered just what happened to these souls he ripped from their host. The witches obviously died, but what happened after the fact? Leland accepted the lost soul, breathing in its life force while eradicating its fleeing life. Or was he allowing the soul to reincarnate? His legacy fed him information about such a feat, something that conflicted with his own understanding. Leland didn't believe in reincarnation, in fact, most of the world didn't. It was common knowledge that the souls of the damned were the dead, all of the dead. Every single person to have ever died became a lost soul, at least until they grew enough sentience to ferry over to the land of the dead. The Lord of Souls made sure that every lost soul eventually crossed the boundary. It was his job to guide, to free. No souls escaped his help, and all eventually left their mortal plane for elsewhere. There was no reincarnation, no life after death, something the Lord of Souls had preached to his legacies for millennia. But still, the foreign information given to Leland by the Lord of Curses told something different. Yet, it also spoke of the land after death and the clear difference between the two. "You okay, Leels?" Leland's eyes creaked over. Maybe. That's better than no, at least," laughed Jude. The last remaining witch came into Leland's view. The man shivered like he had just been out in a blizzard but still managed to get to his wobbly knees as Bor approached. The butler didn't let the man live, ending his corrupt life with a swift stab. Finding himself then staring down Bor, Leland gave him a half-hearted nod. Glennie whispered, "He's not going to attack us, right?" That spell was different. Leland found himself idly nodding. I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't. It's okay, everything is okay." They watched Bor look around the section of cleared street before walking over. Giving Leland one last look, he spoke, "We need to move. I don't sense anyone looking at us, but that spell was quite a showing. Someone had to have seen, which means people are going to soon be hunting you." Leland recoiled, the pain suddenly deciding to spike. "Hunt me? Surely you don't think that a spell like that is going to be simply let go? People are often desperate for power, if they think they can use you, then they will hunt and capture you." "Oh, right," Leland trailed off. Jude coughed. "We better find Poppy and get out of here. How likely are they to track us?" Bor deliberated for a moment. "Unlikely they will be able to get much from this battle. You 3 aren't exactly well known, which means trackers will have less to go by. Most likely you will be hunted by appearance alone. How do you feel about hats?" Glennie frowned for Leland. "Is that meant to be a joke?" "Not at all. In fact, I think you all should get hats." "Right." Bor nodded, straightened his thin leather armor, and walked away. The boys followed quickly after, albeit a bit slowly. As the minutes passed, so did Leland's head ache, at least to a manageable point. It still blazed deep within his skull, but the thumping had died down to nothing more than a dull throb. "So," Jude asked, "where do we find this Poppy?" Bor eyed the group before pointing across the bridges and scaffolding to a nondescript ladder. The boys traced the ladder down, finding it stretching for an eternity before eventually disappearing into the darkness. "You can't be serious. The smuggling operations that even the Smugglers Guild don't like to talk about happen down there. If Poppy really deals with body parts, she'll be in the depths." Chapter 37, Information. The Huntress was annoyed. It wasn't the fact that there was a city below the city of Shoutwell, one that decisively dealt with crime. Nor the fact that it had remained hidden even after a full-scale Royal Inquisitor investigation. It wasn't even the fact that her marks, Leland and his 2 friends, had found it before her. No, her seething irritation didn't have anything to do with the Smugglers Guild, at least, not directly. She scoffed at the body of a dead witch, one that had tried, and failed, to run from her. From her. She couldn't believe it. Did these irreparable peons not know who she was? She wore her Inquisitor crest directly on her armor, surely they'd know who she was with a simple glance. But that wasn't even the worst part of it all. The Huntress did not like cleaning up, specifically the mess of babies. How the butler didn't notice the 6 other witches that remained hidden in the shadows was beyond her. But then again, the man was a thieving pirate. He hid it well, but she recognized his rapier skills from an ancient report she read years ago. In fact, the huntress had hunted Boar, or rather the former Shoutwell crime lord, way back before she was promoted to Royal Inquisitor. Who'd have thought that following some children would solve one of this city's greatest mysteries? She asked herself. She sighed. Boar was nothing but a shadow of his former self, the ruthless rapier, as they called him. Now he was an old man, one playing house with a noble family. He's not worth the battle, the huntress mused, going through the pockets of the thugs she had just dispatched. Low level, she decided. Far down on the totem pole, probably nothing more than fodder to escape the witch brand. No, there were big players in the underbelly, ones that she simply had to let go. At least for the moment. She'd be back, and she'd clean this entire guild up. She could see the spotlight now, blinding from all the praise she'd receive. But first, Leland. And the sightless, she supposed. The huntress skipped across the scaffolding and found a vantage point in line with the ladder to the deep dark unknown. She watched 3 boys and an old man scale the rusty iron, descending despite their obvious hesitance. Leland had surprised her again, although she couldn't quite place why. His lord was still up in the air, as was just how his spells worked. She'd never seen such a display of beauty and brutality before. He soothed 2 combatants while shearing the souls of 4 others. What kind of lord could do such a thing? None she'd heard of, that was for sure. Still, as long as Leland stayed on the path of law and order, she'd allow him to live. His unique combat prowess could easily place him in the kingdom's top rank of fighters. However, that also meant he had the potential to become one of the kingdom's greatest enemies. If it came to that, she'd need to prepare against the Inquisitor's silver as well. No doubt they'd come for revenge. No self-respecting mother and father would abandon their child. Unlike her own. The huntress huffed, now more annoyed. She had only met Leland once, and he was somehow causing her to think of her family. Pathetic, she whispered about herself, pushing down her self-loathing and refocusing on the task at hand. Are you sure you're okay? Jude asked. The group was resting on the last rocky platform before the final stretch to reaching the bottom of the cavern. Glennie had long returned Leland's ring of regeneration and Boar had handed over a small vial of red-brown liquid, but somehow his headache still blazed. Yeah, he answered. I don't think this is a normal headache. I just need time. Glennie frowned at that. We don't have time. Murderer sociopaths are killing people, remember? I know. Let's get down there and do what we came here for, Leland said, stepping off the safe platform and onto the flimsy ladder. They descended slowly, each step down risked breaking the thin layer of rust connecting the rungs to the side railing. As the minutes passed, the sound of waves grew louder. Eventually the ladder became slick with salt and water, making the final steps that much more difficult. Leland was the first one off and he found a small walkway leading directly to a partially rotted wooden door. He frowned, finding the situation oddly familiar. Jude was next off the ladder and instantly said, "Oh no, not another door at the bottom of a drop." Leland snapped his fingers. I knew it looked familiar. Glennie was next. I bet Boar says this is the True Smugglers Guild. Ha! Deal, 10 gold, Jude laughed. A moment later Boar exited the ladder and stepped forward. He then turned to the boys, I would like to welcome you to the True Smugglers Guild. Jude's face fell while Glennie smiled with pride. Before we go in there, he continued. Just remember that the items in there are property and are being sold for a lot of gold. You will disagree with most everything being sold, do not make a scene. That is the fastest way for us to get into trouble. Leland took a deep breath. Are there going to be people for sale? As in slavery? Boar asked. No. That was outlawed here many years ago. There may, however, be smuggled mercenaries looking for work. Although I suspect those would sell their services up a few levels. How do you know all of this? We heard what those witches said to you. Boar placed his hand on the door. Later. Remember why we came here? He pushed. It was just a hallway. I expected more, hummed Jude. As did I, Glennie added. Boar took a step in and removed a stick from a nearby barrel. Lighting the torch, he spoke, let's go. The party made their way through the hallway and quickly found multiple intersections and muffled murmurs of conversation. Doors, often with runic carved locks on the outside, lined the walls, each numbered and each closed. They eventually entered a small opening, one with tables and a bar counter. A few patrons sat around, each wearing hoods or sitting in the shadows. Bor ignored them and the looks he received, striding right up to the barkeeper. "Charlie." "Bor. I'm glad to see you haven't aged a day. Stop your pandering. Why are you here? Last time we saw each other you made me lose an eye." The barkeeper pointed a mangled hand at his face, more specifically his velvet black eye patch. "Well, I wouldn't mind taking the other," Bor said, receiving a snarl in return. "But we are in a bit of a time crunch." "You do now the sightless cult is in town, right?" Charlie scoffed. "Yeah, so what? Rumor is a smuggler named Poppy brought over their lord." The two men held a long stare before the barkeeper turned away. "Well, is it true?" he asked the shadows. A woman leaned forward, a thick hood blocking her face. She tilted her head, looking at Bor and the children following him. "What do you think?" she said, fading back into the shadows. Charlie shrugged. "There you have it. Now, get out." Bor gave an annoyed look to the boys. Leland coughed. "Our source said she'd be the one to ask, not that she was the smuggler who brought the parts." Poppy's voice came from the shadows. "And who's this source?" Hesitantly, Leland said, "Can't say." "And why do they think I know things?" "Because you deal with body parts, and the sightless brought in body parts." Poppy then stood from her chair and ventured over to the bar. "Come with me," she said to the group. They followed her out of the bar and into the hallways. They passed doors and vaults, the entire time Bor kept his sword hand on his tattoo. Poppy abruptly stopped, fished out a set of keys, and pushed open her door. The stench was what hit the group first. Rotting meat mixed with boiled eggs, the smell of excrement and mold. Poppy pushed a rune by the doorframe and suddenly light sprung into the small room. Body parts hung from chains, arms were locked against the floor, and heads lay within glass prisons. Each item had colorful gems encrusted into their ears or teeth, shiny metal weapons clutched between their dead fingers, or elaborate tattoos drawn on their skin. Dark primal urges radiated from each part along with the feeling of nausea. Poppy quickly shut the door. "I sell cursed body parts. Specifically, ones with cursed artifacts latched onto their original wearer. Don't worry, these are all grave robberies. Not murders, if that was what you were thinking." "I wasn't," Jude quickly said. Glennie swallowed his disgust. "And people buy them. Oh, you'd be surprised. So you don't know anything about the sightless cult and how they are reconstructing their lord here?" Leland asked. Poppy thought for a long moment. "Please, people are dying." She didn't seem to care. Bor sighed and rubbed his temples. "I'll draw you a map to under the guild's main vault." "Big Boss or Simon?" Poppy asked, her face non-interested. "Simon. Deal." She laughed. A few minutes and a rough sketch later, Poppy said, "Okay, here's what I've heard." Chapter 38, Hidden Threats. The group didn't stick around the Smugglers Guild for long. With Poppy's information freshly on their minds, they quickly found an exit. Bor led them to an elevator, one the four of them had to squeeze to fit into. It moved slow and rough, like an old train riding across handmade tracks. Glennie broke the silence. "I think this is the time for you to explain who you are, Bor." The butler sighed. "Not much to tell. I'm old, I've lived. I suspect that you three will have similar stories about your lives as time passes." "Not good enough." Bor sighed. "I suppose it's not. Simple truth of my life is that I used to be a pirate." Jude frowned. "Like Scourge of the High Seas or Plunderer of Lost Treasure?" "The second one. Those that robbed ships were captured and killed over the centuries. The Royal Navy does not take kindly to such things." That didn't make sense to Leland. "Why call yourself a pirate if you only searched for treasure? Why not archaeologist or explorer or something like that?" "Ah," Bor sighed. "Because those don't kill each other to try to get better scores. My crew battled against other crews constantly, all in the name of riches and fame. At first we didn't call ourselves pirates, no, but there came a time when we were no different. And you needed a place to sell your loot, thus shout well. But how'd you come to be a butler?" Bor's eyes fell. "My crew rose in strength and power. We fought for dominance with others, eventually winning the crown of the guild. Others tried to threaten our seats, but they were all handled the same way. We had everything we could ever want, but I still wasn't happy. My unhappiness led to fighting in battles we could have avoided. My men trusted me, and I pushed them into pointless death. I thought someone somewhere may have the single piece of treasure I would need to be happy. I was wrong, and most of my men died because of it. Those who survived left my crew and joined my competitors, eventually turning on me. Jude asked, "Does Lady Onryo know all of this?" "Of course she does. It was, after all, her grandfather who found me at death's door," Bor answered, a fleeting smile finding his lips. I was still rather young at that point, at least for people of my skill and power. Master Onryo took me in and gave me purpose. At first it was a simple mercenary position, one that was more than expendable. But our friendship grew over the years. Eventually he died and his son succeeded. I watched this young man grow, marry, have a child, and die untimely, his wife falling not long after. He was the first person I truly called a friend, and from that point, I dedicated my life to the Onryos. "Then why did that witch say you were with the Icewillows?" Leland asked. Bor took a deep breath. Lady Onryo was young when she took over the house. Her inexperience brought the worst kind of people to Shoutwell, including the Icewillows. I could protect her from the assassins or invaders but not the political enemies. House Onryo lost most of its prestige in the following years, all the while the Icewillows drained the city dry. The elevator suddenly opened to a white marble room. A blown glass chandelier hung from the ceiling and reflected against the shiny stonework floor. Men and women in suits and fancy dresses shuffled around, passing large banknotes around like apples at the market. A squirrely man stood before the elevator looking confused. He pushed his glasses up and said, "I'll get the next one." Bor grunted and slapped the elevator's control dial. Once the group was moving again, he continued, "Lady Onryo tasked me with infiltrating the Icewillows and uncovering their evil deeds. I did, but not after failing her eldest son. Darwin Onryo already had an addiction at that point. His intentions were well praised, however. He simply fell to the lucky blue. I couldn't help him, not without losing my cover with the Icewillows. For a few years I watched Darwin from the shadows. I tried to clean the underbelly's streets, I tried to rid the city of Lucky Blue. But we are a guild of smugglers. There was no way to block the drugs' entry to the city. Eventually I collected enough information for the Inquisitors, but by then it was too late. Darwin had taken his last breath of mana dust. Leland looked to his friends. "We know the rest, thank you for trusting us with your story." Bor gave him a gentle smile. "And now, the city we fought for, has a new invader. The Sightless may not have set their talons into the underbelly, but once they do, they'll have the largest smuggling operation this far east at their fingertips." "We won't let that happen," Jude replied. "The Inquisitors are on their way and they've vanquished the cult before." "That they have," Bor agreed before his face turned dark. "But if what Poppy told us is true, then we don't have the luxury of time. Their lord is going to be born long before that." They fell silent with that, only the sound of the elevator's slow climb filling the air. The next stop was theirs, and they all exited. They exited into a dusty room full of cobwebs and the odd scrap of wood or foul-smelling puddle of liquid. Bor didn't waste time, quickly showing the boys the way out. Soon enough the group was back on the streets of Shoutwell, venturing through the thick fog that spilled from the city's sewers. Despite being early morning at this point, the streets were deserted. They quickly sped through what was once a lively corner market, only finding the occasional rotting piece of fruit. Glennie paused, however, stopping the group. Something was whispering, something deep within his mind and body. Hairs stuck straight up on the back of his neck, forcing him to draw his weapons as an only safeguard. "What is it?" Jude asked, pulling his axe from his hand tattoo. "That wall," Glennie answered, sticking his daggers out as if to ward off a frontal assault. "Don't look at it." Leland complied, but not before scanning the edges of the carvings in the wooden wall. A simple glyph arc was enough for him to identify the problem. "It's a sigil." "What do we do?" asked Jude. "We can't just leave it here." Bor took the young berserker's words to heart and stepped forward. Rapier now in hand and with his eyes closed, the butler slashed the wall until he heard the wood fall apart. Carefully, he checked his work, finding a haphazardly butchered pile of broken planks of wood. "Is that enough?" he asked Leland. "Honestly? I have no idea." "It is," Glennie answered. "I can't feel it anymore." That caused 3 frowns to sprout. "You can feel what exactly?" Jude asked. The Sightless King. What? Leland shouted. Glennie only shook his head, bottling up his fear. I don't know. I hadn't felt its presence since you destroyed the sigil inside of me. But just now, until Boar destroyed the wall, I could hear whispering. That's not good, Glennie. That's really not good. Leland's breath quickened. Sigils can't remain. They either get burned away by Brix's counter-sigil or they overpower the purification flames. Are you saying the sigil is still there? No, the rogue confidently said. No. It's gone. I know it is. Leland's breath hitched. But how are you still feeling the Sightless King? Glennie shook his head. Could it have left a piece of itself inside me? I've never heard of such a thing. In fact, that shouldn't be possible. Not unless... Unless what? Jude asked, his own confidence fleeting. Leland swallowed. Just what is the Sightless King? How do we know it even uses the same basis of magic as us? Mana-abled monsters breath fire or send magical blasts in completely unique ways. What if the Sightless King isn't so much a person or lord, but rather a monster? One that is sentient enough to compel his whims on those who he deems usable. The group stood silently in the abandoned market, the fog slowly drifting around them. Jude gave his friends a smirk. Other inquisitors will be here soon, we just need to pester the Sightless until they do. Boar added, we need to report to Lady Onryo about our conversation with Poppy. She needs to make decisions before the guards' morning meeting. Everyone nodded to that, even Leland whose eyes were slowly unsticking from being set open wide. They fell back into walking through the city, eventually entering the gated residence of House Onryo. The smell of smoke met them with open arms. Boar cursed, rushing ahead and disappearing into the white mist. That's when four hooded figures stepped through the fog to meet them, weapons already drawn and the stains of fresh blood dripping from their obscured faces. Chapter 39, Invasion. Guys, Glennie muttered with a shiver. I'm hearing whispers again. Both parties looked at each other, or rather, faced each other. From the amount of crimson liquid pouring from the cowls of the intruders, Leland took a wild guess that they were eyeless. They're blind, right? He asked, summoning forth his grimoire. Each figure held an arm out and palms up. They waited there, silently praying for fuel. Red soon sparked along their open hands, like ill-defined crackling lightning. It splintered and flickered as energy passed through one reality and into their own. One by one the cultists accepted their lord's sacrifice, consuming it with open minds. It absorbed into their skin, lighting their veins and muscles from underneath. Soon the light traversed through their bodies, entering their heart and soul. Leland snarled at the familiar showcase. I think they just accepted a part of their lord's soul into themselves. Despite being a dozen paces away, one cultist swiveled at Leland's words, locking eyes with him. You have knowledge you should not, the woman said. How interesting. Leland's grimoire flipped to a contract. He hesitated on which to choose, deciding to enact the Lord of Magic's potency boon for the simple fact that he didn't know how the cultists would react to additional emotions. If the Sightless King already controlled them, who knew whether they had any humanity left? As Glennie disappeared into the fog, a shriek whistle cut through the air. A moment later Jude catapulted himself toward his target. Maul, Leland whispered, focusing on the woman who had spoken earlier. Crows entered the fight, blazing down like green meteors. They took to their target, aiding Jude in combat. Suddenly Glennie appeared as well, both daggers finding the red robes of the Sightless. Pain erupted from the woman's spine, breaking her guard. The crows attacked any and all open skin, primarily the bloodied face under the hood. It didn't matter much, as Jude swung down with a mighty cry. The woman's skull was split open. Leland recoiled but quickly found a new target. He commanded his birds, moving them to the next cultist with haste. Fracture, he whispered with a snap. Fracture. Fracture. The man screeched in pain, only for a dagger to slit his throat a moment later. At the same time, Jude removed another's hand from her wrist. Leland took a deep breath, focusing on the last one. Slow, he said, connecting his heart to the cultists. Unreadable emotions flooded Leland's mind, each screaming over one another for dominance. Pain, fear, happiness, satisfaction. They consumed his sight, overloading him like steam overflowing from a sealed pot. He was ready to explode, he was ready to give his life away. It wasn't his anymore, it was the thing he. Breath came back to Leland just in time to see Jude remove the man's head. He grimaced at the sight, the spray of blood something he never quite got used to. His normal emotions came back a moment later, and he finally collapsed. He fell to his butt, finding the hard ground oddly soft. He needed to sleep, his head was still throbbing. You good, Leels? Yeah, he answered. I just need rest. Anyone hurt? I need a minute. No, they were pushovers, Glennie answered. Civilians, look. He pointed to the nearest cultist's hand, more specifically the tattoo of a barrel flowing with foamy beer. Jude frowned at that, nudging another's hand with his axe, revealing a tattoo of a man carrying a box. Lord of Bruise and Lord of Labor, Glennie cursed. Jude flipped over the severed hand. This one is a legacy of the Lord of Currency. A banker most likely. He then checked the woman who had spoken. I don't recognize this tattoo. Either of you. Leland squinted at the woman's blood-covered hand. In black ink was a small depiction of a faded crescent moon against a cloudy night. At the correct angle, the moon would disappear leaving the sky empty. Lord of Night. No, that tattoo is a starry night, Glennie said. Maybe Lord of the Moon. I think I've met a legacy of the moon before. I don't remember a crescent moon, I think it was full. When did you meet a legacy of the moon? My parents took me to a carnival a few towns over like 6 years ago. Their main attraction was a woman who could glow bright during the night. Sounds lame. That's what my mom said. But my dad dragged us there anyway. Glennie raised an eyebrow. Was it lame? Yeah, Jude laughed. Very. Something nagged in the back of Leland's mind. Lord of the Moonless? He asked, not believing his own idea. Is that a thing? Glennie asked. I've never heard of a moonless. And does it matter? Jude continued. She's dead. Leland agreed with both. Yeah, I was just spitballing Lord titles. A fading moon that disappears. I guess it could be Lord of the New Moon. I like moonless better. But new moon is more likely. More symbolism and stuff. Leland shrugged. We need to get moving. Boar might need our help. Stick close, there might be more of them. The others agreed and started towards the fog-obscured mansion. The smell of smoke still perfumed the area, although no orange or heat permeated the fog. They followed up the pathway and into the mansion's courtyard where signs of battle started to rack up. At first it was a ruffled bush with fallen flowers, then scuff marks on the pristine lawn. It wasn't until they came upon a spatter of blood that the boys started running. A broken statue was next, followed by the corpse of a cultist. Leland briefly paused to inspect the dead, finding the tattoo of the Lord of Masonry. I don't understand, he said. A distraction. Glennie and Jude only shrugged. The trio eventually made it to the broken open front door, more blood and the occasional corpse along the path. They entered, weapons drawn and ready. They followed scorch marks and the odd flame item. Spirit fire, Leland said. Be ready to fight off illusions. You think the Onryos will attack us? Jude asked. No, but illusions can't identify friends. We all will feel its effects. As they passed the hallway leading to the study, Glennie abruptly stopped. He trembled for a long second, his dagger flailing about. Gritting his teeth, he suddenly punched the wall. Cracks split from the impact and a painting fell from its nail a few steps away. Something powerful is here, he seethed. The whispering is growing stronger. The others nodded, stepping forward carefully. They filed through the kitchen and back hallways, eventually finding themselves behind the mansion entirely. The wake of battle had suddenly stopped but quiet chanting had started. They peered through the window, finding a wide arc of red. Dozens of cultists stood shoulder to shoulder, each mirror images of one another. They wore the same robes, bled from their obscured faces, and each held weapons. They murmured off language, non-words for whatever sick song they sang. Off to one side was Alkin clutching the spirit fire candle for dear life. Blood trickled from a cut along his forehead and eye, one deep yet superficial. He was crouched, his small frame covering his unconscious mother and fearful sister. Lady Onryo lay in a pool of blood, her hair matted and scalp butchered. Lady Mavi looked the most healthy of the three, but her fear-filled eyes told a different story. She held her gaze on the source of their torment, a woman wearing prime white robes. The woman faced off against Boar, each fighting to a standstill while the chanting grew louder by the second. Leland paused at the woman's appearance. Beside the difference in wear, she was also the only cultist with their hood down. Her eyes were gone, only grayed sockets, remnants of what was once present. Thick glowing veins appeared along her face, each tracing into the dry sockets like fuel lines. Glennie shuddered, his hands clamping over his daggers. I can't let go. We need to help, but how? Jude asked. Do you recognize how the woman is battling Boar? I can't even see her attacks. Leland said. The woman moved like a puppet on strings. She glided around the air, moving her limbs in odd angles or jerky motions. Every attack of Boar's was parried away from an unseen force or blocked from the woman's own hand. How is she blocking with her naked hand? I can't let go, Glennie said again. She's not, Leland answered. There's a small gap between her hand and Boar's sword. She's controlling something invisible. Maybe a suit of armor. Guys, help, please. Leland and Jude both looked over. Glennie sat there shaking, both hands stark white around his weapons. Slowly, Jude reached over and pried the daggers from his friend. Is it the whispers? Glennie harshly nodded. Aye, it's the chanting. It's so loud. Make it stop. Please. Leland and Jude looked to one another, then back outside. A silent agreement overcame the pair and they took up arms. We'll be right back, Glennie. Don't move. They didn't wait for an answer. Leland's grimoire flipped to its newest page. Harbinger Halo had long faded and the 1-hour cooldown had yet to be fulfilled, but he still had an available boon. He ignored the pain in his mind and focused on his legacy. As Jude jumped into the fray of red robes, Leland spoke the power words for his newest curse. Kneel before me. Violet flames engulfed his vision as his domain spread out. 5 yards was all he had to work with, so he set his sights in the center of the pack cultists. Soon enough purple flames sprouted from the ground along with the souls of the damned. Next to Leland a familiar soul entered the realm of the living. It held out an ethereal hand, offering the lost soul it had kept safe for its master. Chapter 40, Praise be. Leland took one final look at the shivering form of his best friend and accepted his summons gift. He touched the soul of the damned, pulling the lost soul it held into his body. He breathed in, combining his soul with the witches he killed hours ago. Grimacing, Leland expected his headache to redouble, but nothing of the sort happened. The green mist entered his body and didn't fight for dominance inside his body. It accepted its new life as a fuel source, giving itself willingly. The boon pushed Leland's hand into battle, the implications of his spell not important enough to warrant allowing Jude to fight alone. Inside his circle of souls, 6 cultists stood looking hesitantly at 6 souls clawing out of the ground. As the souls' heads eclipsed the grassy backyard, violet burning eyes shone through their ethereal forms. They locked eyes with their cultist counterparts, summoning forth 6 whirlpools of life force and mana. Purple fire burst from beneath each intruder before quickly fading into a ghostly outline. The whirlpools pulled at the cultists' souls, ripping them from their fleshy husks by way of green mist. Each started leaking green, some more so than others. Their souls pooled around their obscured cowls, under their hoods and from their hollow eye sockets. Then the screaming started. One by one the cultists realized something was violently wrong with the situation they found themselves in. They were supposed to invade House Onryo and get out alive. The mansion's defenders were out and the mansion's residents were weak. Oh, how they had been led astray. The words echoed in each of their minds, decompounded and reforged by the skeletal stairs of the souls breaching the soft ground. The longer the cultists looked into the eyes of purple flame, the quicker their minds melted away from humanity. It was painless, they found, but nonetheless not what they wanted. Some chose to fight, rushing the circular pillar of fire around them. They only found pain, the violet flames too much for their sheared souls to pass through. More green spilled, finally taking a first victim. The other cultists didn't even know his name. They only knew that they were soon to die in the same way. An ethereal green man appeared from the man's body, like a magnet had pulled his soul from his skin. A moment later, a soul of the damned locked eyes with the lost soul, guiding it out of the fire and a few paces away. The soul reappeared, arms outstretched in offering to its master. Leland didn't waste time or worry about his well-being, he accepted the lost soul into himself despite the animosity he felt from the green mist. A moment later he stumbled a step, blood trickling from his nose like he had just been kicked in the head. No more, he told himself. I'll have to make do with just this. Power came to his heart and soul, ushering in new magical strength. Ignoring the remaining 5 cultists being swallowed by his circle of souls, Leland found Jude hacking his way through the other red robes. Powerful swing after powerful swing, the legacy of the berserker cut down any and all who stood in his way. His chest and face matched his battle axe, bloodied and deadly. The inexperienced and non-combatant cultists died with ease, Jude finishing them off in droves. Suddenly Leland and his curses joined the fray, ethereal birds and the sound of bones chipping made their presences known. He kept his crows on the cultists that looked to be actual fighters, having them switch from one to the other every few seconds. This, along with breaking the bones of the cultists who seemed to be spellcasters, kept the horde frozen in dull chanting. Jude didn't notice, however, the rage building up and taking control. His emotions came in quickly, Leland's calming blanket failing at the first sigh of Glennie's agony. Jude fell into himself, allowing his legacy to take over. He'd do anything to make the chanting stop. Something sheared down his shoulder and back. He turned, not even sparing a moment to make sure of his target. Jude's axe cut the man down before the man could even reset his guard. Jude roared, the pain along his back going numb. He pushed forward again, finding multiple slowed targets easy pickings. A red crescent of fury lacerated deep into a cultist trying, and failing, to retreat. He leaped forward, finding a new patch of cultists to decimate. Before he could finish an overhand swing, an invisible force blocked his axe. Jude growled, pushing with all his might to cut down the cultist before him. He lasted less than a heartbeat. Suddenly Jude found himself hurtling through the air, traveling towards the back property of House Onryo. He landed awkwardly in a set of bushes, his ankle broken but without pain. Jude huffed, white exhale blasting from his heated lungs. He scanned the fog-laden backyard while rushing back, finding his target in silky white robes. She was dueling Boar, invisible forces blocking the butler's every attack. Jude joined in, only seeing red. He swung, ignorant of his ally's proximity. Boar grunted with irritation, allowing the young man to take the lead. Together they battled, each aiming to kill. Suddenly the woman jerked in a skidding motion, her body failing to move to her command. Crows rushed through the foggy air, diving into her. They hit an invisible wall, each ethereal summon popping out of existence with a caw. She moved an arm, blocking an axe swipe. The steel weapon collided against her magic, muting the attack and sending it off course. Still, pain found her. She groaned, not having felt true pain in many, many years. It was a rib, she knew instantly. Broken, sundered into weakness then forcibly snapped with her movements. Boar cut into her shoulder. She screeched, her concentration flaring back alive. Boar and Jude were knocked away, and the woman suddenly had set her eyeless sockets on Leland. The legacy of Curse's eyes went wide as the fog before him split. A force cut through the backyard like a torpedo through dark waters. He threw up his arms in guard, activating his only defensive measure. A bubble of electricity snapped in front of him growing from the necklace he had won from Guildmaster Gilbert so long ago. It formed a full aegis, impacting against the hidden threat yet sending him spiraling back. Colliding with a brick wall, Leland fell to his knees and puked blood. Soon he was surrounded by 5 souls of the damned, each with their arms out in offering. "You keep those safe," he cursed, finding his feet. "I'll take them from you soon." Magic found his fingertips. Fracture. 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 The woman in white spared Leland a glance but Boar kept her from attacking. She was on the back foot, finding her body to be sluggish and pain-riddled. Jude attacked as well but favoring an ankle only inhibited his power. "Leland," a voice from his side called. He spun, finding Alkin, Mavi, and Lady Onryo. Lady Onryo was now conscious but her eyes spun within her skull. Her gaze drifted from object to object, never focusing on any one thing for more than a moment. "Is she okay?" Leland asked. Mavi answered, "Concussed but yes." "Put this on her." Leland handed over his ring of regeneration. But you just threw up blood. You need it." Leland shook his head. "She needs to help Boar and Jude." "I'm spent." Alkin hesitated but did as his friend asked. The group fell back into watching the battle unfold, specifically Jude and his fleeting body. "Come on, Mom." "Here, take the candle," Alkin said, shoving the spirit fire artifact into her hands. Lady Onryo held the item, her vision still spinning. Jude was suddenly sent flying, an invisible punch knocking him far into the fog. Leland bit his lip, cursed, and rushed after him. He hurdled cultists' bodies and ran around blood puddles, eventually finding his friend in a flower bed unconscious. "That's for the best," he thought, thinking of Jude's berserker rage. Still, Leland dragged his friend out of the thorny bushes, watching for red movement within the fog. While no cultists came for him, something caught his eye. High above the mansion a little dot of flame formed. It slowly grew as the seconds passed and eventually it caused the ground to tremble. Wind whipped through the backyard, clearing the fog like a leaf blower. It was then Leland saw what the flaming dot was. A meteor. It rushed down, like an anvil dropped by the sun, eventually taking up the entirety of the sky above. Leland wanted to scream but found his body too tired to move. He covered Jude the best he could and simply watched. Bor and the woman in white noticed the certain death from above. The butler moved first, rushing to Alkin and the other Onryos like his life depended on it. The woman, however, hesitated. She looked from her target to the meteor and back, the clear choice of action overcoming her will to her lord. She held up a broken arm, forming her magic to the fullest. A thin outline enveloped her from behind, consuming her like a box holding an item. Suddenly she disappeared within the outline, her magic doing the same a moment later. The woman was gone. Then the meteor disappeared as well, simply poofed out of existence. Leland's mouth hung open, his gaze slowly finding a swaying Lady Onryo clutching a blue flame candle. She fell unconscious a moment later, Bor catching her before she hit the ground. It took a few minutes, but Leland eventually convinced Alkin and Mavi to help him carry Jude inside the mansion. When he did, he froze. "Where's Glennie?" The world crumbled, as did Leland. Chapter 41, Cabin in the Woods. The huntress sat with her elbows on a table and slowly thumped herself in the forehead. How did it come to this, she wondered, eyeing her most recent capture. More specifically, she wondered just how dumb 3 boys could be. Did not one of them have any sense? Why was the smart one so blind? Why was the big one so juvenile? Why was the quiet one so? Ugh, she spit. What did I expect? She asked herself. 3 children, babies as far as this world was concerned, going off and playing hero. The thought made her sick. Heroes weren't simply born, they were forged after countless battles and hundreds of world-shattering tribulations. Which, now that she thought about it, was exactly what the boys were going through right now. Maybe she was the dumb one for involving herself? A groan from across the room kicked the huntress from her musing. She stood, took a quick peek out of the blinds, and meandered over. She was not looking forward to the next couple of days, but this had to be done. Otherwise her project would end abruptly and she'd have to write a few letters. Bah, she muttered. Her capture reacted to the sound, abruptly sitting upright. Relax, I'm not going to kill you. If I was, you'd have never seen me. A splitting pain rushed through Glennie's head. He quickly shut his eyes, finding solace in the darkness. I think I'm concussed, he blurted. I did hit you in the head pretty hard, the huntress said. Maybe it's because of that. You think? Yes. Oh. The huntress suddenly had the urge to hit the quiet one again. Why are they all so stupid? She screamed in her head. So, who are you? He asked. She blinked at him. Look at me. Glennie slowly creaked his eyes open, finding a woman standing with the posture of a soldier. Her raven hair was tightly wrapped into a bun, a color mimicked through her wear. Light armor, all black, the kind used for discreet night operations or crazy spouses stalking their ex. Glennie sided with the former. His head felt like jelly again, so he gently closed his eyes and leaned back. He wasn't stupid, he recognized her right away, but she didn't know that. Years of training and lectures came back to him in that moment, all taught by his parents. Was I supposed to recognize you? He asked. With his eyes closed, Glennie couldn't see the exacerbation on the huntress' face. He could, however, hear the leather of her gloves creak and whine as she clenched her fists. Suddenly something hard hit him in the chest and fell against the firm bed where he sat. Drink it, he heard. And he did, not before inspecting the liquid with sight, taste, and smell. 3 senses are nearly impossible to fool, always go for 3. More if you can, he repeated in his head, his mother's words. Warmth bubbled in Glennie's stomach and suddenly the rawness of his head waned. Expensive healing potion, he said. You owe me 70 gold. No I don't. You hit me, remember? Or do you have a concussion as well? This time Glennie did see the frustration on his captor's face. I hate children, the huntress muttered. This is why I never married. Never married? Because you didn't want children? What? That doesn't make any sense. She rolled her eyes, sitting down at a dusty table. It was then Glennie took a full inventory of the room. Old, rotting, dozens of cobwebs, probably hundreds of spiders. He shivered. Boarded windows, massive lock on the door. Looking for an exit, the huntress asked. Sorry, but I didn't leave any. Glennie responded fast. That's dumb. What? I mean, wouldn't having at least one escape route be wise? Multiple is better, actually. What happens if someone breaks in and tries to kill you? The huntress closed her eyes and took a breath. First of all, if someone broke in, I'd simply kill them. No questions, no second chances. Secondly, I do have escape routes, you are just too inexperienced to see them, not to mention, too weak to utilize them. Glennie crossed his arms. I don't believe you. My mother used to lie to me to get me to listen to her all the time when I was a kid. She eventually had to start explaining why instead of telling me no. She sighed. If I tell you, would you shut up for 1 minute? Glennie shrugged. Oh goody, the huntress mocked. You can be quiet. And I pegged you as the quiet one. That wall, I'd just break it down if someone broke in, and killing them right away wasn't an option. Glennie followed her finger, finding a wall. From a cursory glance, the wall looked exactly as a wall, no weak spots or large cracks. He sighed, knowing the coveted huntress would be powerful enough to simply break through a wall at will. For an entire minute, the huntress fell into her own thoughts. And, 60. Okay, 1 minute is up, why am I here? She rubbed her eyes. Look, kid. I'm not going to hurt you, but I'm also not going to let you go. So, can we stop this whole innocence act? It's unbecoming of you, I know what you are really like, and this is not it. Glennie's face quivered. Fine, why have you brought me here? Also, how long have you been watching us? To save your life, and since you three came out of that dungeon. Understandable. Incredibly so. Why though? The huntress scratched her head. Frankly, because Leland interested me. Then I realized you three were really just kids. But by then you three identified the sightless cult, and since I was the closest inquisitor, I had to stay. Glennie raised an eyebrow. And what have you found? Know where their hideout is or what their plans are? She snorted. Their plans are always the same. The resurrection of the sightless king. And no, I haven't investigated them at all. What? Why not? We could have already eradicated them from Shoutwell by now. Glennie's yell made him cringe in pain. Seems like that health potion didn't fix everything, the huntress laughed. And yes, you are correct. But there is something far more interesting in this town than the sightless. A cultist is a silver a dozen. One of their leaders, a gold. A bishop or high priest, those are closer to 10 gold a dozen. But it's not every day I find something truly unique. Your mother would be proud. Glennie cracked open an eye and glared. You know nothing of my mother. She shrugged. Wrong, but that's not important. And before you go get a big head, I wasn't referring to just you. All three of you are special in your own right. Seeing Glennie's unimpressed face, she continued. Let's start with Leland. Son of two of the greatest mages this century has to offer, not to mention his obscure or unique legacy. The kid's already powerful enough to, nearly, single-handedly take out a mutated monolion. Do you have any fathomable idea how long a dungeon boss monster takes to mutate? Glennie shrugged. A few years. Try decades, the huntress laughed. And when someone finally does kill it, it's a snot-nosed baby only a week after his dream ceremony. That's unheard of. We helped. Then we have Jude. A kid so loyal to his friends, at the first sign of one of them getting hurt he falls into a true berserker rage. It usually takes years for berserker legacies to have issues with rage. How long ago was Jude's dream ceremony? I counted a half-dozen months. Glennie pushed back his red hair. What can I say? Jude's a good friend. She scoffed. Try an amazing friend. Glennie didn't answer. Then we have you, a legacy of the chameleon, son of a world-renowned legacy of the chameleon. A rare, and often made fun of, legacy, but it can work. I know, I've seen it. My mother, Glennie stated. Indeed, the huntress nodded. And do you know how your mother rose to the level of power she was? I can tell you it wasn't because she mastered the dagger or that weird tongue ability. Because she was adaptable. Yes in words, wrong in execution. Tell me, why do you think you needed saving? You not asking right after you woke up tells me you already know. Glennie shivered and momentarily fell into himself. He could still hear it, the whispering. The sightless king hung just outside his vision, watching, waiting, and thriving. Because, he spoke. It's still in me. Exactly, the huntress leveled herself with Glennie, staring into his eyes. Faintly, wisps of red appeared in his irises. Now why didn't the sigil disappear after Leland vanquished it? Well, it did. But not before your legacy adapted to it. The sightless king is now a part of you, whether you like it or not. I don't understand. My mother never had the chance to explain your shared legacy. I suspect your father holds her instruction, but you and Jude are more similar than simply being annoying children. You both discovered something that you shouldn't have. Not this young, at least. So I need to talk to my father? Have him tell me how to adapt? Glennie asked. Sure, if you don't mind dying in the meantime. Or, at least, go mad. Then, you. The huntress rolled her eyes. I wouldn't have saved you if not. She tossed him a dark cloak. Now, put that on and let's get moving. Glennie eyed the parasitic cloak that the monolion toad dropped upon its death. How did you? You'd be stupid not to bind it to yourself. That is the kind of item people kill for. Selling it would be a shame. Doing as instructed, Glennie donned the starry speckled piece of fabric. It laced just under his chin, the collar scratching against his neck. He grimaced but then felt the cloak's power wash over him. He felt odd. Like his senses had all suddenly waned and reformed. Good, the huntress said. It's not cursed. Cursed parasite items are a thing. She shrugged. Most are. People usually just put up with the curse because the boon is too good to pass up. Or, because they can't remove it. Those curses really suck. Now come on, we're late. A moment later they were out the boarded door and Glennie had to hide his shock. They were in the mountains, the snowy peaks seemingly at arm's reach. Then the cold hit him. Adapt or die, the huntress said. Only during the night are you allowed to enter the cabin and the heating runes. Glennie suddenly felt small. Miss Huntress? How am I suppose? Firstly, call me Isabel. Secondly, she gestured to the wilderness. Adapt to the cold. Adapt to the lack of food. Adapt to the monsters that prowl the area. Good luck. Suddenly, she exploded into a hail of sparks, disappearing from the very place she stood. Glennie shivered. Chapter 42, Nightmares. Leland woke up with a shock. He sat straight up, his vision going wide. A groan escaped his lips, pain still drifting around his mind. Ah, you're awake. Turning, Leland found Alkin sitting in a rocking chair with a book in his hands. How long have I been out? 2 days. They were in an unfamiliar plain room. It was smaller and less opulent than anything in Onryo Mansion. From a glance out of the window, Leland saw that there was no fog. In fact, there was only a clear blue sky. Where are we? Alkin hesitated for a moment, snapping his book closed. A small village outside of Shoutwell. Jude. Asleep in the next room over. Glennie? Leland asked, his voice breaking. Again Alkin hesitated. Bor searched for him. But, curling up into a ball, for the next few minutes Leland didn't speak. He only wished his parents were on their way, he needed their help, they all did. He desperately needed them to tell him it would be okay, that he did his best, and that everything that had happened wasn't his fault. But that wasn't going to happen, and he knew it. They were too far away, too caught up in whatever. His dad would teleport a letter, sure, but what good were written words when the world was crumbling? What was he supposed to do? Glennie had been taken or killed, and either way he was ill-prepared to handle the next steps. What happened? He asked. Alkin cleared his throat. After Mother dispersed the meteor illusion, we helped you move Jude into the mansion. Glennie wasn't there, and you went manic. Theses, things, clawed their way up from the ground and you suddenly started glowing green. Your eyes, we could see that you were not there. Bor knocked you out before you harmed anyone or yourself. Leland wiped away a tear. What about the mansion then? Why are we outside the city? The mansion is not safe. Not with the sightless running around, I mean. Alkin handed over some jerky and water. They almost killed us. If my mother didn't rouse when she did. Is she okay? Are you okay? Leland asked. Yes to both of us, but my mother is still in and out of consciousness. Bor went to find medicine or healing potions. This village doesn't have an apothecary, but he should be back soon. Maybe. Least hurt out of us all. Good, good, Leland laid back, finding a scratchy pillow that felt oddly like a cloud. He pulled at his tattoo, removing his grimoire and flipping it to the information page. It had been some time since he last checked on his progress, and now that Glennie was missing, he'd need every advantage possible. The tome felt heavy in his hands, however, something he'd never noticed before. You have assisted in killing multiple witches and those that follow false lords. An appropriate reward has been added to your legacy. Fracture has increased to rank 8. 90% chance to break a random bone in a single target. Crow Massacre has increased to rank 7. Summon 10 ethereal crows to attack a target for 1 minute. Curse of Collapse has increased to rank 5. Exhaust the target for 100 seconds, lowering their speed by 25%. Harbinger Halo has increased to rank 4. Contract lasts for 240 seconds. Circle of Souls has increased to rank 3. Encase the souls of those within 15 yards, siphoning their life force while chaining them to this reality. Fully consume a soul to increase your magical potency by 3% for 1 minute. Overall, Leland was content with his progression. Under normal circumstances, he'd be thrilled. But, well, not when his best friend was out there alone. Leland? Alkin asked. How are you making your book float? Leland did a double take at the question and realized his grimoire was hovering just above his prone face at the perfect distance for reading. That was strange, right? He honestly didn't know, only that the tome was heavy and... When did it start floating? He asked himself. Am I missing something? Seeing Alkin's confused face, he answered aloud, not sure, if I'm being honest. But it doesn't matter. Let's go check on Jude. And they did. The small inn they were staying in was all wood, old, and quite loud. For being in a small village, Leland felt the noise pollution to be like that of a major city market square. How can it be this loud? What are they doing downstairs? Leland asked, looking off the interior balcony down at the main floor. Alkin looked from his friend to the floor and back. What do you mean? There's no one down there. I'm pretty sure we are the only guests here. Leland fumbled, tripping over his feet. Suddenly the noise dissipated, leaving the walkway silent. He just shook his head, pushing into Jude's room. It was much like the one he woke up in, but there on the bed was the berserker legacy. Reminds me of when you and I first met, Alkin said. Back in the dungeon, you were the first awake then as well. And Glennie was second, Leland quickly retorted. Jude was snoring, but otherwise looked uninjured. His tattoo of regeneration was out on full display, the itchy blanket hardly covering his chest. Leland and Alkin were not amused. Wake up, Leland said. Come on Jude, you've slept enough. The brute stirred, finding an unfamiliar ceiling. Did we win? No. Oh. Glennie's missing. Jude sprung to his feet. What? Alkin took the liberty to answer. We are not fully sure what happened. After the cultist in white left, we returned to the mansion only to find Glennie was missing. Bor looked for him, but he didn't find any trails. We've been out for 2 days, Leland added. 2 days? Jude echoed, falling to his butt on the bed. I don't remember anything. You were pretty raged out. He groaned. Sorry. Don't be, Alkin said. You, Bor, and Leland fought against the sightless leader and essentially saved our lives. She ran away, Leland supplied. We got most of the lower-ranked cultists though. Jude sulked in silence for a moment, but a question got the better of him. You said we had been out for 2 days. Leland nodded. My newest spell doesn't leave me in the best headspace. It seems losing Glennie pushed me over the edge. Groaning, Jude said, welcome to the club. Leland smiled at that. A presence appeared in the doorway. Bor the butler stood holding a sack of glass vials. Apologies for the interruption, but I figured Master Alkin would wish to be present. I have brought many potions. Alkin nodded vigorously and scampered out of the room. Bor, however, did not follow right away. He lingered, eyeing Jude and Leland. Settling on Jude first, Bor said, "Thank you for your help with the leader. I was unable to make any headway, and you gave me a few openings." His eyes fell to Leland. "You, frighten me." "What?" Leland recoiled. Bor didn't answer right away, his eyes shifting back and forth. "When you found young Glennie was missing, you changed. For lack of a better word. Those things came and fed you power, power that you wielded with absolution." It was then Leland noticed the butler's arm. It was limp. "You're hurt?" "Who?" "You did," Bor said simply. "I had extracted the others from your domain, but the power was killing you. I had to intervene, which meant moving close." Leland's face fell. I am sorry. My spell breaks bones, I must not have been. My arm is not broken." "Well, not really. One of those things hit me. It ripped part of my soul from my body, my arm specifically." Bor pulled up his sleeve, revealing a grey wrinkled appendage. "Feeling is returning," he said. "Albeit slowly. I understand quite well. You were not in control. Although I do warn you to find a path forward. There is only ruin if you continue. That goes for both of you." Jude nodded right away, but Leland just stared at Bor's arm. Bor didn't say another word and simply turned away. The boys followed shortly after, but not before Jude wrapped an arm around Leland and pulled him into a short hug. "We'll find him." "Yes, we will." Lady Onryo was awake but sitting in a dark room with her eyes closed. The moment Alkin opened the door, however, she grimaced. Mavi spoke for her. "Is Bor back?" "I am," Bor said, stepping around Alkin. He fished through his sack of glassware, eventually finding 3 small red vials. "Drink." He pushed the potions over to Lady Onryo. She did, instantly finding that the cloudy magma in her head cooled. Jude and Leland entered at this point and shared cautious glances with the house matriarch. "It seems I'm going to be paying quite a bit for your services after all," she said after the potions took effect. Leland didn't feel like speaking. Jude did. "I want a harmonica. My old ones were stolen." Leland did, however, feel like giving his friend a sideways glare. "I'd like to formally apologize for Glennie going missing. None of this would have happened if—" "It's all right, we'll find him." Leland interrupted. Lady Onryo nodded. "What did you learn from the smuggler?" Bor took the initiative and answered. Chapter 43, Cracks. Poppy was not forthcoming with her information, nor did she give up her source. "So, she might have been throwing us for a loop," Bor said. Lady Onryo nodded. "She's a smuggler. We wouldn't take her words as gospel anyway." With that said, Poppy didn't know who smuggled the sightless king parts into Shoutwell. She suspected the cult lied about what they wanted smuggled. "They have a code, see? Cults are outside their bounds." Leland scoffed. "But cursed jewelry with human parts is within their lines." Bor nodded slowly, eyeing the legacy of curses. "Yes. Similarly, weapons of mass destruction are not something any smuggler would agree to move. Not unless there was an immediate coup d'état and the weapons were procured by the leading power's enemies." Leland didn't respond. Poppy didn't have a name. And even if she did, it wouldn't matter. What she did have was a location. How the parts got brought into the city. Lady Onryo sighed. "That's it. The cult could be anywhere by now." Bor shook his head. The entrance location was a pipe leading directly into the sewers. Jude, mid-bite of jerky, said, "But we already knew they were in the sewers. Why would they defend the entrances with sigils?" Leland frowned at that. "Why was there a sigil in the market then? Seems unneeded." Mavi spoke up as well. "It doesn't even matter, does it? We can't exactly waltz back into the city. Not after the sightless came to our home. They would be on the lookout." Leland and Jude stared at her. "No offense," she quickly added. "No offense." Jude echoed, a scoff in his breath. "That's all. We will walk into the city," Leland interrupted. "Glennie comes first. Over all of you. Simple as that. If we can't come up with a plan now, Jude and I leave and get him back ourselves. Frankly, you four are LU." Jude cut his friend off. "Glennie is priority right now. Take it or leave it." Bor and Lady Onryo shared a look while Mavi lowered her head. Alkin was the first to speak up. "I agree. He saved me, it's only natural I'd have his back as well. That pulled some glances. His mother gave him a poignant look. You speak for all of us now. I speak for myself. Oh ho, and how exactly would you help two suicidal teens? Throw yourself at the cultists and hope Leland and Jude can kill them fast enough. Alkin bit his lip. I protected you and Mavi before Bor arrived, didn't I? That was the candle. Shut up. Everyone turned to Jude. What is wrong with you all? Already throwing in the towel, Lady Onryo? Afraid to assist the city, Lady Mavi? Afraid of a kid, Butler Bor? Why is Alkin the only one wishing to protect Shoutwell and the people in it? He spit. That's hardly. Why was Alkin the only one looking for assistance for your family's situation? It seems he thinks the House Onryo name is worth fighting for. What have you three been doing? Expecting me, Glennie, and Leels to do everything for you? And here I was in favor of helping in the first place. Boy was I wrong. With that, Jude left the stunned room. Leland stuck around for a few minutes longer, but when the conversation failed to move in a productive way, he left as well. Not before giving Alkin a pat on the back. Let me know what you decide, Leland said to Bor, then followed Jude's trail. The village they were in was small, very small. A few sporadic buildings, a single inn, and plenty of livestock. Residents were out and about, each working on their daily tasks while glancing suspiciously at Leland as he passed. The small community reminded him of home, of just weeks ago. Leland paused at that, realizing it had only been a few weeks. So much had happened, so many fights, near-death experiences, and fun. Adventuring was his dream, it had been his dream since first hearing his parents' stories. Sure, his legacy was not what he originally envisioned, but it was working out. Quite amazingly if he was being honest. But why was he not happy? Glennie was the simple answer. Having a friend go missing was something that always played in the back of his mind. It came with the job, adventurers died, disappeared, or were horribly maimed all the time. He had thought he prepared for it, but evidently not. Still, even when Leland disregarded Glennie for a moment, he was still unhappy. Jude's berserker problem was an issue, yes, but one he had confidence Jude would figure out. Glennie's grieving didn't help the situation either, but if Leland was being honest, he saw Glennie's attitude as something to strive toward. He wanted to help Alkin, he wanted to help House Onryo. Despite his own pain, Glennie wanted to help people. And Leland admired his friend for that. Was that it? Leland asked himself. Am I unhappy because I wanted to run? Because I was right? It was a sick thought, one that made him rethink his childhood dreams of becoming an adventurer. He was a coward, and now Glennie was paying the price. Jude suddenly appeared next to him. We'll get him back. Leland straightened. Yes, we will. And then we will dismantle the sightless cult. Smiling, Jude said, there he is. What? You've been in your own head for a while now. I'm glad to see your confidence again. Leland smiled somberly, wondering what sort of hell Glennie was in right now. We need to get stronger, Jude said. Yet. They found themselves at a fenced field, cows and the like grazing around. The weather was getting colder, but the cloudless sky made it the perfect weather for animals. They practically frolicked around, eating grass or the occasional budding flower. What are we going to do? Leland asked, his face finding his hands. He leaned into the fence, rocking on the balls of his feet. Simple answer is kill all the cultists. I'm not sure if we will be able to rely on Lady Onryo. Maybe Bor, but not the actual house members. We could try to sneak into their hideout and reclaim Glennie. Jude sighed. We still don't know where in the sewers they are located. And they could be holding Glennie in a different spot. Leland agreed with that. Then we need to scout and find them. Sigils, we can follow the sigils. The more sigils in an area, the closer we probably are to their base. That's dangerous though. We both saw what happened to Glennie. We both saw what the Sightless King was like. Yeah, Leland trailed off. Then we need help. Neither of us are the sneaky type. Bor is, at least somewhat, but I'm not sure if I trust him to help Glennie over his masters. Maybe we can hire some adventurers? The guard. Both seem unlikely. Not many adventurers in the city, and the guard is the guard. They are going to follow what their captains say. Jude snapped. What about the underbelly? Bor said mercenaries sell their services down there. That's a good idea. But how much gold are they going to ask for to fight against the sightless? We have a small fortune, but not enough to buy an army. What we really need is the Inquisitors. Our parents could get here quicker than whichever team was en route to shout well, but we'd have to write a letter and that would take a while. Both boys fell silent, content with watching the farm animals for the moment. Leland always liked the less combat-oriented legacies. Some were gruff around those with the prominent combat tattoos like the Lord of Magics, but Leland himself had never had that experience. Those of his hometown always greeted him or checked in on him. He was left alone for most of his childhood, after all. Why were the cultists mainly non-combatants? He asked aloud. Jude cracked an eyebrow. I was thinking the same thing, specifically that moonless tattoo. The woman in white had the same one. Really? That's bizarre. Two people with the same legacy, both turned cultist. Born into it, you think? Jude didn't answer straight away, instead he asked, what even is the sightless cult? Who were their members before their lord took hold of them? Leland shrugged. I only know what our parents told us. They formed a few continents away and held crusades against their homeland. Eventually they were eradicated and scattered to the corners of the world. Here being one of those. The moonless tattoo is bothering me. Agreed, Leland cursed himself for having the idea. I could always ask the Moonless Lord or whatever their title is. Could you? We aren't even sure if they exist. Worth a shot, yet. What could you get out of this lord? Leland shrugged. Not much, I don't think. Information mostly. I can't imagine a lord is happy about their legacies turning coat and following some other being. Jude frowned at that. Or they could be very happy about that and send someone to kill you for asking. They conversed for a few hours longer and eventually Alkin found them. My mother is prepared to forego helping Glennie and wait for the royal cavalry to retake the city once the sightless have. Leland and Jude's mouths fell. Alkin held up a hand. She allowed Bor to choose if he would help you too or not. He chose to help. Leland smiled at that. All right. We leave in the morning. In the meantime, we have to figure out just what lord that tattoo belonged to. Jude slapped a meaty hand on his friend's back. Let's get to it then. Chapter 44, Moonless. Leland found himself suddenly standing in a black void. Speckles of stars drifted past him at impossible speeds, each burning brighter than the last. At some point he had to close his eyes, the light having grown to be too much. Despite the odd scenery, Leland was pleasantly surprised. Lying in bed asking random combinations of lords and the moon to form a contract was something he nor Jude wanted to do. Lord of the Moonless, his initial guess, happened to be correct, thus making his evening quite short. Just only hoped that this meeting was fruitful. The light flooding past his eyelids eventually dimmed and he took a hesitant glance around. Again, he was pleasantly surprised. The domain of the Moonless Lord was a simple infinite grass field below an endless night sky. Simple yet elegant, Leland mused to himself. Unlike the Lord of Spirit's domain, there was no path forward. So, he simply waited. Without invitation, Leland felt like a trespasser in these lands and he figured it best not to anger the host. His waiting abruptly ended when a presence stirred in the sky. A pressure bore down on Leland's shoulders, forcing him to his knees and pressing his head into the lush green. There was no pain, he noted, something the Lord of Magic and Lord of Curses had explained to him so long ago. In the domains of the immortal, he, a mortal, was untouchable. Still, showing respect and offering a gift had been recommended, something he did not do. Who are you? And why do I smell the death of a moon on you? With his head still bowed, Leland forced his jaw to move despite the pressure. My name is Leland Silver, Legacy of Curses. And because I have slain one of your legacies, if I identified their tattoo correctly, of course. The sky vibrated, like an earthquake sundering a mountain. Things shifted above Leland, his vision firmly planted on the ground. The pressure eventually eased, allowing him to search the sky for the lord of this domain. He found no one, but the constellations had changed. From sporadic dots of light, a depiction of a clouded night above a bland field. An arc of stars winked in and out of view, just like the tattoo of the cultist. That is the tattoo we encountered, yes, Leland said. The voice appeared almost instantly. And you have killed them? Which one of them? Which one of my moons have perished? The pressure reappeared, pushing into Leland like gravity had increased several-fold. He fought against it, standing straight despite the rough strain within his spine. Yes, Leland forced out, his jaw failing to work properly. She attacked us unprovoked. Led a group of non-combatant civilians into a home invasion and ultimately got them killed as well. It does not matter, you have killed one of mine and come to my home. A punishment befitting of your ignorance is called for. From which country do you hail? I shall send a tidal wave. With a growl, Leland shouted, she was corrupted by the sightless king. She acted on his orders, killing innocents. He didn't quite know how true that statement actually was. The sightless king didn't seem like the one to give orders, but that was just arguing semantics at that point. The woman was a part of the cult, and one way or another she served her lord's will. Leland continued speaking into the void of silence. She was a part of a cult, one with the devotion of a fake lord. She forewent your grace and turned traitor. She was no moon of yours. The pressure on his shoulders relented somewhat. The moonless lord still spoke, however. You know nothing, child of the calamity. You expect me to believe your mortal words? Your kind lies, constantly. Leland frowned at the words. How was he supposed to prove? There is another. A second moon of yours within this cult, he said. I do not know her name, hardly a description, actually. But she is branded with your mark yet uses the power of the sightless king. The constellations changed back to their original orientation. Where? Shout well, a port city. Enough. Be quiet. With a sudden surge of gravity pulling him down, Leland fell onto his butt. The pressure relented a moment later, allowing him to stargaze. This is concerning, the Lord of the Moonless said before his tone turned somber. One of my moons has turned into an abomination. How could this have happened? Explain it to me. Leland grimaced, his patience turning sour. Perhaps a bit of background on yourself and your leguk. No. I don't know what you want from me then. I do not know this woman. I do not know the woman I killed. I met both of them when they invaded my employer's home. We did not have a conversation, we did not speak other than in taunts. They attacked us. That is it. That is all I know. A cold wind rushed through the grassy field. But you know of this cult? These sightless. More than the average person, yes. But not much. They are a cult. Usually they find new members by feeding on those who are lost or damaged. I see. Mortals are weak. Leland internally rolled his eyes. Look, he said, forcing himself to stand. I did not come here to be intimidated or made fun of. I came to ask your help in fighting against this cult. 2 members are already connected to you. Suddenly a crescent moon appeared in the night sky. It faded into reality slowly, like a stubborn child defiantly making an appearance. What do you want, Curse Lord? Leland frowned at the title but saw his chance. Information mainly. Make a contract with me. I cannot. Information is forbidden. He hesitated. By you or my magic? It matters not. I may tell you information. But no contracts. All right. My friends and I had never seen your mark before, then suddenly there are 2 of them. We need to know why and why they choose to leave you for a false king. The moon in the sky faded and returned, like it was breathing. No, the Lord of the Moonless said. Ask a different question. What? Why is my pride, the greatest of mortal emotions? It seems I still have yet to shed all of my lowly chains. Leland blinked at the statement and quickly racked his brain for a new question. Why would someone leave their lord for a monster? Fear, greed, money. Mortal means. Shaking his eyes, Leland changed tactics. What does your legacy do? Is it combative? I am the Moonless, not the Moonfall. We do not fight, we harmonize. We make art. We transfix the most beautiful starry nights on the most renowned canvas. Something clicked in Leland's mind. Greed then. They wanted power. They don't necessarily want to resurrect the sightless king, but they want his power, the power they couldn't have during their dream ceremonies. But in the end none of that matters. They are killing innocents. Their legacies have no meaning at this point. How does? What does? No, it doesn't. Ask your question, mortal. Smiling, Leland ignored the Lord for a moment. Learning the history of a cult was great and all, but that wasn't the main objective. He needed something to fight them off, something to retrieve Glennie with. He needed an army, he needed to be stronger. In return for me killing you moon that was led astray, you sign a contract with me. I need to find the cult's base. I need to find where they plan to resurrect their lord. The pulsating moon thought over the request. Fine. It shall be done. The eyeless woman in white stood before the statue of her lord. She felt with the power he bestowed onto her, seeing the world for what it truly was. Everything was wrong, everything was misplaced. She was not the blind one, everyone else was. The world was. She had grown into this power, this life, through struggle and strife. Recent events were nothing but her lord testing her resolve. Her sister's death was meaningless in the grand scheme of the sightless plans. Their goals were much more than her life, or those she once called loved ones. She was weak, there was nothing more to it. Her sister had died because she was like the others. Spineless. They floated around the edge of true belief, never accepting the sightless king into themselves. They used his power, they exercised petty revenge on those who wronged them. Bosses, neighbors, guards, judges. Cowards, she spit, holding her hands out. It was time. The weak had proven themselves to be one thing, however. Fodder. She smiled at the thought, her lord was as cunning as he was powerful. Why give his full power to any random peasant that bowed before his statue when he could give them a fraction of the amount and still receive the same outcome? Genius, she sang. Absolutely genius. When her lord first told her to start a rebirth in Shoutwell, she couldn't see the outcome. Trust the process, a phrase she and her sister repeated to each other when they were shaping the heavens. Back then it hardly felt real, back then the process never made sense. But now? Now with nearly 200 eyes sitting around her, each waiting to be taken, she finally understood the saying. True art was the final outcome, who cared what the painting looked like before that? It only took her harvesting the eyes of civilian and cultist alike to realize that. She laughed to herself. Too bad art was the least of her lord's worries.